you for that introduction. Oh, just by the way, my internet is a little bit spotty, so if I cut out, feel free to react with the crying laughing emoji, or you can just nod and smile. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen and talk a little bit about drawing. So the title of my workshop is called Drawing for Survival because drawing has changed my life. And I graduated from OCAD's illustration program last year. And since then, I've been jumping between like working part-time in arts administration, freelancing, and just kind of goofing off. So when it's my own practice, I find my attention split between a lot of different interests. But the one thing that has stayed consistent for me is drawing. When I first started illustration school, I learned very quickly that a lot of people take drawing very seriously. Like I felt, or maybe I imagined, that my peers and I often like agonized over which techniques we should be learning, whether our drawings were tight or loose or fun enough, and whether we were putting things into perspective right, or what we were able to draw, what we were unable to draw. Um, and we kind of let ourselves get lost in the pretensions of style and like the limits of our abilities and stuff. So that's like the perspective that I'm kind of speaking from tonight. But beyond these formal concerns, we also thought a lot about the practice of drawing. So things like, oh, I haven't been drawing at all recently. I finally filled out my sketchbook, or I need to draw sketches for my next assignment, but I can't quite get into the groove. Like, I find that I often oscillate between two different philosophies when it comes to this. One, that any formal rules should be completely disregarded and you should just be able to draw whenever you want, and you shouldn't worry about like, how much effort you're putting into your practice. Or two, that only through learning like the discipline of formal elements can you feel any deep power or satisfaction when you draw. So these are two things that I'm kind of negotiating in my own process. But I think that regardless of your approach, what I hope that we can do today is kind of introduce and play with some techniques and ideas that might help you arrive at or enrich your own drawing practice. And I think it's a useful habit to develop, even if your own work isn't directly related to it. And I'll make a few cases for this. I mean, first of all, it's mainly because drawing has always done wonders for me when my own mental health is unstable. So I would encourage everyone else to think about drawing in this way, which is something that you do regularly whenever you feel like it, not necessarily because you want to make a particular finished product, but just so that you can enjoy the way it feels almost, if that makes sense. Like a lot of exciting discoveries can arise from just doing something to play and explore. Um, and the utility of this practice also emerges when you think about drawing as a form of like reflection or record keeping, right? You can use it to reflect on your thoughts, memories, and emotions if you keep a daily sketchbook or journal. That's also a drawing practice. It's also a form of expression that is so extremely accessible and readily available. Like drawing is one of the oldest forms of art, right? There's something so primal and immediate about just picking up a tool and scrolling on the surface. And this is like a 73,000 year old like rock flake that like was drawn on with pigments. And it's also an ancient art form in the timeline of our own lives as well. Like, I wonder, I can even think back to like when I was drawing as a kid and just like having a sheet of printer paper like this close to my face, just like on the floor and stuff. I feel like it's one of the first things we learn how to do when we're kids, like the first forms of creative expression. And I'm wondering too if we can reach almost back to that nonverbal place with drawing as well. Plus, drawing is great because it can be easier than communicating across language barriers. So it's easier than the written word in some ways because you don't need to rely on the predetermined building blocks of words and their connotations, right? Like drawing can convey specific and particular sensations only recognized and absorbed in pictorial form. I'm thinking about how linguistic and cultural barriers can make it difficult or awkward to talk to my parents about mental health or relationship issues, because we don't usually talk about affairs of the heart like that, and I don't have the vocabulary for it. But whenever my mom sees my drawings, she knows that there's like an emo teenager living deep inside of me, and I'm able to convey that through drawing. Of course, that's not to say that images don't have their own culturally specific connotations and meanings, like no language is perfect, but what I would encourage folks to explore is how to start developing your own visual vocabulary. For example, like when you're drawing, you can take notes of what kinds of lines or shapes you tend to repeat, like what feels good for you, or even what you might feel unsettled by or intrigued by. And as you create more and more drawings, you might find patterns or themes, and then you can begin to ask yourself why it is that you're drawn to certain images, or why you keep returning to certain symbols or ways of producing artwork. For example, like for me, there are certain poses that I always want to draw, and it makes me think about how I'm feeling in relation to people in my life, right? Drawing can help access that psychological dream space, which is super, super useful. And I'm sorry for this image. I literally just Google imaged manifestation and like found the best diagram I could because I didn't know what picture to put here. But drawing can be like a form of manifestation, which so it sounds pretty new agey, but I feel like because we're undergoing crisis, particularly right now, more than ever before, it can be very difficult to imagine a future and be hopeful about the future, right? So I think that a lot of people are now interested in what it means to envision a future. I hear it a lot when people talk about getting serious with a partner. Like, can you envision a future with the person that you love? Or even in like activist and abolitionist contexts, like we need to first imagine a future without police. Or like everybody loves to quote Mark Fisher on it being easier to imagine an apocalypse than a future without capitalism. And I feel like because envisioning in and of itself is a great power, like drawing is an extension of that, right? And then there's the physical sensation of drawing, which can be meditative or even erotic. Like different surfaces or mark making tools can completely change the pleasurability of drawing. There can be something purely ASMR about drawing. I love ASMR right now. um, Now I'll talk a little bit about tools and what tools you might want to use when you're drawing. Does everybody have like sheets of paper and like things to draw with? I think as you like start your drawing practice, you'll like start to find things that you really like to draw with and things that you might not like as much. So does everybody have like a pencil? Yeah. Okay, so this is like a mechanical pencil. And it's not that great for getting different variations in line, but you can get like a really consistent line. A pencil like this, you can oscillate between thick and thin lines more. And with pencils like this, there might also be like a numerical code on it that indicates how hard or soft the lead is. Like something that's a 4B lead is going to be a lot softer than a pencil with a 4H lead. And that means that you'll get darker lines too. So you can experiment with that as we go through our exercises today. And you might also want an eraser. Or if you're really like daring, you don't even have to use an eraser. You can just cross things out or pretend that your mistakes were intentional. But those are useful too. And then if you have like a pen, this is another drawing tool for the daring because you can erase, but you can get like a super consistent line with a pen too. So if you have some or all of these tools, you can experiment with them today. I mean, for our exercises today, we can use whatever you want, but maybe let's just start with pencil for the first exercise because it's a bit easier to control. Okay, let's dive right into some exercises. Just clear off enough room on your desk to be able to draw freely and not be too cramped up. And also make sure your work area is well lit so that you can kind of see what you're doing, because that makes a big difference. If you need to grab a lamp or something, you can do that right now. And I'll just be guiding you guys through these exercises and talking a little bit to give prompts, but feel free to look away from your screen and respond from the page however you like. I also don't want to pressure anyone to like keep their camera on while they're drawing because I know that like Zoom can make people feel super self-conscious sometimes. So if you need to turn off your camera, you can do that too. All right, is everyone good? Are we ready to begin? Yes. Okay. I'm seeing some nodding, so I'm going to take that as universal agreement. Okay. All drawings start with a line. So lines can be dark or light. Take your pencil and try making the darkest mark you can. Then try making the lightest mark you can and see how that feels. The lightest mark. Even within one line, you can start off really dark. You can try starting off super, super dark and then going light and then going dark again. And see if you can make that change all in one line. Pay attention to how that transition feels. Lines can also be thick or thin. They can be curved or jagged or straight as a needle. If you have different tools like a pen or a marker, you can also try drawing lines with these tools and just see how that feels, right? The difference of resistance or sensitivity or ease of control between your different tools. Okay. Now that we've gotten used to our tools a bit, let's turn a fresh page, or you can use the same page if you have enough space. So on this page, we're going to draw 4 lines. To prompt each line, I'm going to give you an action word. So think about how these feelings or states of being might be translated into your line. So first, let's start off with a whimpering line. What does that mean to you, a whimper? You can think about the speed of your mark. You can think about whether you want it to be horizontal or vertical. Okay. Next, let's try drawing a line that rejoices. What is a rejoicing line? Next, think about the word blossoming. Let's try to draw a blossoming line. What is that act, to blossom? How might that be translated through the curves and energy of your line? Remember, there's no right or wrong answer. Okay. So finally, for our last line, let's try to draw a rotting line. So think about the textures, smells, the movement, the physicality of rotting. What does that mean for you? And try to imbue your line with that sensation. Okay. Now let's turn a fresh page once you're done with your line. So now we're going to think a little bit about shapes. What happens when the two ends of a line connect with each other? The focus shifts from just a mark in space to the silhouette of them. When the two ends of a line connect with each other, you're creating a kind of delineation between the interior and the exterior. Suddenly there's an inside, an outside, and a perimeter between the two. In other words, you've created a shape. They can be geometric, which means defined by straight lines, or they can be organic, which means defined by curved lines. They can be symmetrical or asymmetrical, top heavy or bottom heavy, pointed or round, complex or simple. The shape can be larger than the space around it, or super, super tiny, just wading through a sea of negative space. Just like lines, different shapes can evoke different feelings, right? So let's try to create a shape. So on your blank page, try creating a shape that represents how you're feeling today. And I want to challenge you to also avoid using representational symbols like hearts or stars. Try creating your own kind of shape in response to how are you feeling today. You can take a second to recollect what happened today, the emotions that you felt. And as you create your shape, consider the things that I talked about earlier, right? The size of your shape, the weight of it. If it were animated, how would you imagine it moving? You can think about something like that too. Does it have a lot of appendages or is it quite simple? And once you're done with your shape, you can imagine that this shape exists in an ecosystem with other forms. Think about other people, places, events, or relationships in your life as other shapes and add them to your picture, or just things that have been affecting you lately. Try to draw those as shapes too. You can also think about how each shape might interact with each other. Do they touch? Do they overlap? Maybe some shapes envelop others entirely, or maybe some other shapes watch from a distance. Build your ecosystem in whichever way makes sense for you. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about focus. When we construct an image, we might think about how our eyes traveling in the picture plane. So what that means is, where do we want to look first? Where do we want to rest our eyes in the image? Will the eye flow through the scene in like a simple and direct path, or will it jump all over the picture plane? When considering the trajectory of the eye, we might want to determine the focal point of the image, which just refers to an area of the picture the viewer's eye will always gravitate towards. Kind of like a magnet that attracts other areas of the, or maybe it's a lot lighter than the other areas of the picture. Or just through positioning or through leading lines. So let's take our collection of shapes, what we've just drawn, and think about where we might want to create a focal point or a visual magnet. So what relationship or structure do you kind of want to highlight in your ecosystem? Is there any out to you that you think is interesting? A center of attention that you, or you can shift the focal point to a different spot. So once you've picked the place where you want the viewer to focus, you can try doing a number of things to kind of grab their attention. You can make that area darker or lighter, like I mentioned before. You could also add some details and patterns there, or make the lines there bolder or thicker. Or you can add in some lines to your ecosystem and kind of get some lines pointing in that direction or leading towards that focal point in some way. And as you develop your focal point, you can probably see that you're probably adding more detail or making that area darker. And it's suddenly shifted kind of where the weight of the image is, right? Okay. So let's move on to some freeform exercises. Just some more techniques to kind of help you guide your drawing practice. So let's turn a new page and we can start emptying our mind. It can be fun and meditative to draw with an empty mind and kind of let that guide your mark making. It's kind of like turning on autopilot on purpose. So just a really quick ham-fisted art history lesson. Surrealists referred to this as automatism, which is just like letting unconscious mind draw. So the idea of psychoanalysis was really new and exciting to surrealists, and being able to access your dreaming mind by doing an automatic drawing was like really invaluable for them, right? You might also call it freestyling, whatever you want to call it. Let's draw something now on the blank page without thinking about the image. Try to avoid anything representational, and you can even just close your eyes if that helps, right? Just close your eyes and let your hand guide you. Don't worry too much about what the image looks like. Wherever your hand wants to go, just let it go. It's like a Ouija board without the board. If there's an area that you want to focus on over and over, let it happen. Just emptying your mind and letting your hand guide you. Five more seconds. Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit. So if everyone has a sheet of printer paper or something even thinner, like tissue paper or tracing paper, take that out. And we're just gonna start doing a bit of tracing. So tracing is a great way to fall back into the safety of rules and rigidity after doing something really free form. And what I want you guys to do is go on your computer and find a photo that you like that you've taken recently, or maybe just something sitting on your desktop. Something taken by you is best, but you can also source an image from the internet. Just try not to use like a pre-existing drawing. Find a picture that you might want to trace. Everyone find it? Or do you need like a few more minutes? Okay, so turn up your brightness really, really high. Um, and then just like put your paper against the picture that you want, and then just like trace it directly onto your paper. But like press gently so you don't damage your screen. Um, you can think of the lines as like an original image, like an absolute set of rules that you want to copy, or you can just think of it as a suggestion and then like kind of do your own thing. If you have a phone, you can do this with a phone too, but like I tried it before and the touchscreen really interferes with trying to not make the image move around. So you can try to do it with your phone if you want a challenge. You can try omitting some of the pre-existing lines as you trace or making new forms, or you can try and capture every little detail of whatever you're tracing. If you get bored of tracing one part of the image, you can try moving your paper around um, and kind of overlapping images or just playing around with where you want things to go, kind of like a collage. Think about which areas of the image are important for you to keep exactly, or which parts aren't so important. All right, let's move on to the next exercise. So this is kind of similar. Let's use a new sheet of paper. If you have a sheet of paper with something printed on it already, like a gridded or ruled notebook, or like a photocopy or something with text on it already that you can draw on, take that out now. Or if you only have blank sheets of paper, that's okay too. But what I call scaffolding basically refers to a drawing that responds to something that's already on the page and kind of using it as like a trellis for a new drawing. So kind of like tracing, you're working with pre-existing material, but unlike tracing, you're not really trying to copy or mimic the pre-existing material. You're just like drawing while acknowledging that it's there and kind of responding to it. So let's start drawing with the help of this external world. If you are starting with a blank piece of paper, you can grab something to kind of act as a scaffold, as like a ruler, or if you have like a mug or something, you can try tracing areas of that to kind of like get new forms and stuff. Or if you're using a photocopy that has text on it, you can try drawing in response to the text. either thematically or just the way the lines look on the paper. And if you're using gridded or ruled paper, you can think about how to create an image that incorporates those grids. And just thinking about using these pre-existing forms as a kind of scaffold. Try not to fight what's already there. Okay, so let's turn into a new sheet of paper, a blank sheet of paper if you have one. And this exercise is going to be super free form, so just an exercise in imagination, I guess. I'm going to give you a prompt and all you have to do is respond to it. There are no formal restrictions for this one. You can draw however you like and use whatever materials or techniques you want. So here's the prompt. Imagine that a portal has opened up in the very room that you're sitting in right now. So I want you to draw the place that that portal is leading to. What kind of location is it? What's the climate? Is it somewhere you've been before, or is it fantasy? Is it indoors or is it outdoors? Are there people in your environment? If there are any people or other life forms, just try to draw what you see in your imagination. And as you continue your drawing, you might get more ideas for what this place looks like. Okay, let's finish up in the next 10 seconds. Okay, so next, for the last exercise and my favorite exercise, we're going to try out obstruction. And yeah, I think this will be the last one that we do before we just chat for a bit. But basically, we're not going to be making anything new on a new sheet of paper. We're just going to look through all of the drawings that we've done throughout this workshop and pick a drawing to add an obstruction to. Or if you have a sketchbook and you want to use like a drawing from a sketchbook that you already have, you can do that as well. That's fine. But basically, what I'm talking about when I refer to obstruction is just like everybody knows that if you're reading a diary or a confessional letter, all the crossed out words are like the juiciest ones, right? Like, despite the cover up, the inherent contradiction and something being covered up in the first place creates this tension that we're just like naturally drawn to and that we're naturally curious about. So we can use this as a technique in drawing to cloak whatever you're covering up in mystery. Like, for example, I do a lot of figurative work. So I like to think about what happens when you obstruct certain parts of a figure. For example, we look at faces really closely to read the mood of a situation. So if I obstruct facial features, that might create ambiguity in a figure's expression or might make us wonder about what they're thinking. Like what happens if I try to obstruct the eyes or the mouth, or even if the head is like completely removed, the figure kind of loses relatability and feels a little more alien to us, and that can be fun to play with too, right? Or if the figure is at the center of a work, or but their back is turned to us, that's also saying something. So these are just some examples of how I think about obstruction in my work. But let's look through the drawings we've done, and just pick something that we want to cover up for fun, just like an area of a drawing. And it can be an area that you don't like so much, or it can be an area that's of like emotional significance to you, or just something that might look interesting crossed out. Um, but let's try and begin obstructing this object or obstructing this area of the image by either just like crossing or scribbling, or you can obstruct by drawing something completely different on top of it. And you can draw right on top, or you can erase too. So I think I'm gonna obstruct an area of one of my drawings just by erasing. And it can also be fun, like if you're erasing something, but you still kind of see the faint marks of what was once there, you're kind of creating like history in a certain spot of your drawing, right? So you can draw something else on top, or you can just leave it erased. You can try obstructing with a different tool that you have. Like if you have a Sharpie marker, that's great for crossing things out, or a pen. Or it can be fun if like you drew something really, really dark and you're trying to cross it out with something lighter, like pencil. That can have an interesting effect too. Okay, let's just spend 10 more seconds on our obstruction. Okay, so that concludes all of the exercises. Feel free to keep drawing if you want, but how's everyone feeling? I put some questions up on this slide that I'm super curious about and I would love to hear your feedback on. Like, I would love to hear if anything you drew was surprising to you or if it was like different from how you usually work.
I know I personally tend to avoid drawing. It's not something I feel like super at home with. So I was surprised by how like relaxing it was for me. It was,
Relaxing. Okay, cool.
yeah, it was like very meditative.
What does drawing usually feel like for you, if not meditative?
Difficult. um,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
I think that it's especially hard if you're like if you have like an image in your mind of like how you want a drawing to turn out.
I think it also was really like relieving to have like constant prompts being thrown at me and to sort of like feel maybe there isn't like pressure of creating something that looks good in like this environment where we're all just like doodling in our own sketchbooks, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, Sam.
For me, it was opposite. Like usually when I draw, like I'm watching something, I'm like not even thinking about it. But this actually
Right.
like made me think about why I draw what I draw. Like especially when it's like what kind of shapes you usually draw, and like think where you get it from, and like and then the mindlessly like drawing like without even thinking or trying to draw something is just like so like I don't know, felt more uncomfortable because I'm like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'll draw to impress, but I'm like, some of these prompts, I'm like, it might not turn out good and kind of forcing
Right.
myself to be okay with not how expected to turn out.
Yeah, totally. Hmm. It can be challenging to like lose that structure sometimes. And that's interesting that you say sometimes you draw with like a TV show or something in the background. I it's for some reason I find it easier to draw with like certain kinds of music in the background. Like I find it easier to draw with folk music in the background than any other kind of music. And I don't really know what that says, but the environment is really important for sure. I see some comments in the chat. Okay, Ada says exercises like this are helpful to get out of creative ruts. That's true. That's true. Sometimes I want someone to tell me what to do, for sure. Sumer says helps with controlling nature I have when I'm drawing. Yeah, I get that too. Like I also get really frustrated when something isn't turning out the way I want it to be. You put words to my favorite ways to draw. Thank you so much for that vocabulary. Oh, that's so good to hear. Did any of the were any of the exercises particularly challenging for anyone or like difficult? Oh, sorry, I'm just reading the chat again. Yeah, tracing is really helpful too. My friend Yo-Yo, who might be here still, was like talking about how he traces a lot when he draws. And my first instinct was to be like super judgmental. But recently I started tracing too, and I've really come around to it. So I'm glad it was helpful. Yeah, lines have a lot of feelings. Also, Greta, I like that you liked the adjectives. You know, I try to seduce people with the words and then they come into the drawing.
I'm normally so anti-adjective, but I didn't, I have to echo what Yerm said. I didn't realize that a line could hold so much.
Hmm. Okay, cool. I think that is the end of my workshop, unless anyone has any further questions for me. But thank you all so much for participating. I had like such a fun time. And I hope that you will continue drawing whenever you feel like it. And thank you so much to Silverfish for holding this workshop. Irma is also holding another workshop after a bit of a break, so stick around if you can. And I will pass it back off to Silverfish.
Thank you, Lena. Thanks so much for hosting.